Here is one of the strangest and most consequential facts about the Colorado River, the kind of thing that sounds like a mistake when you first hear it. California takes more water from the river than any other state, far more, nearly twice as much as its nearest rival, and yet California is the very last state in line to have its water cut when the river runs short. Arizona and Nevada, which both use far less, get cut first and get cut deepest. The biggest user is the most protected. The smaller users bleed first. It seems backwards that the state drinking the most from a shrinking river should be the most shielded, while its neighbors take the first blows. But it is not a mistake or an accident. It is the result of a century-old legal principle, a fateful bargain struck in the 1960s, and a hierarchy of water rights so powerful it overrides fairness, need, and even common sense. This is the story of why California is last in line, why Arizona and Nevada go first, and what that unequal order reveals about who really controls the most fought-over river in America. To understand any of this, you have to understand the single principle that governs water in the American West, a principle that is simple to state and brutal in its consequences. It is called prior appropriation, and it boils down to a phrase, first in time, first in right. In the West, water rights are ranked by seniority, by who started using the water first. The oldest rights, the most senior, get their full share before anyone junior gets a single drop. It does not matter how big you are, how many people you serve, or how badly you need the water. What matters is the date on your claim. In a shortage, the most junior users are cut all the way to nothing before the senior users lose anything at all. It is a system built not around sharing the pain equally, but around a strict pecking order, where the newcomers are sacrificed to protect those who came before. This principle, more than any reservoir level or drought forecast, is what decides who suffers when the Colorado River falls short. It is worth pausing on how alien this principle feels compared to how we usually think about sharing something scarce. If a family sat down to divide a shrinking amount of food, most people's instinct would be to share the shortage, everyone eating a little less so that all can survive. Western water law does the opposite. It says that the person who sat down at the table first eats their entire meal before the latecomer gets anything, and if there is not enough to go around, it is the latecomer who goes hungry, completely, while the early arrival is untouched. This may sound harsh, even cruel, but it was designed with a purpose. In the arid West, where fortunes and cities were built on the promise of water, the certainty of a senior right was what allowed people to invest, to build canals and plant orchards and found towns, knowing their water was secure. The system traded fairness for reliability. It guaranteed that the earliest developments would always be protected, which encouraged people to build in the first place. But that same reliability, a century later, is exactly what produces the strange spectacle of the largest user being the last to sacrifice, because being early mattered far more than being large. California, it turns out, sits near the very top of that pecking order on the lower river, and its position was cemented by law and by the Supreme Court itself, through a foundational act of Congress in the 1920s, and later confirmed by a landmark Supreme Court decision in the 1960s. California's right to 4.5 million acre-feet of Colorado River water was locked in as senior, legally superior to the claims of its neighbors below it. That seniority is not a matter of opinion or negotiation. It is settled law, backed by the highest court in the land. So, when the river shrinks and cuts must be made, California can point to that century-old legal foundation and say, in effect, our rights come first, and they must be honored before anyone touches ours. It is the strongest hand on the entire lower river, and California plays it in every negotiation. Now, contrast that with Arizona, and you arrive at the heart of why the cuts fall so unevenly. Because Arizona made a fateful bargain that haunts it to this day. Back in the 1960s, Arizona desperately wanted to build an enormous canal, the Central Arizona Project, a vast concrete artery that would carry Colorado River water hundreds of miles across the desert to Phoenix and Tucson, the engine of the state's future growth. But building it required an immense amount of federal money, and California, protecting its own interests, stood in the way. To win California's cooperation and secure the federal funding, Arizona agreed to a devastating concession. It accepted that the water flowing through that new canal would be junior to California's rights. In other words, Arizona traded away its priority in exchange for the canal it needed. It got its water highway, but it accepted that in any shortage, the water in that canal would be cut first, before California lost a drop. That single decision, made decades ago in a room full of negotiators, is the reason Arizona now stands first in line to be cut. And it is why the numbers land so brutally on Phoenix and Tucson today. The consequences of that old bargain are stark. Because so much of Arizona's water flows through that junior canal, Arizona bears the overwhelming share of the early cuts. When the lower basin has to give up water, Arizona absorbs the great majority of the first reductions, a share far out of proportion to its size, while California is largely shielded. In the deepest shortages, the water in Arizona's Great Canal could, in theory, be cut nearly to nothing, except for water protected for tribal nations. Imagine building one of the largest water projects in American history, staking the future of your fastest-growing cities on it, and knowing all the while that it holds the weakest. Most junior claim on the river, first to be sacrificed when the water runs short. That is Arizona's predicament, and it flows directly from the price it paid to get the canal built. What makes the bargain especially painful, in hindsight, is that Arizona had little choice at the time, and could not have foreseen how severe the consequences would become. In the 1960s, the river seemed abundant, the reservoirs were filling, and the idea that shortages might one day cut the canal to nothing looked like a distant, almost theoretical risk. Accepting junior status was the price of admission, the only way to unlock the federal dollars that would build the project the state's future depended on. Arizona's leaders judged, reasonably enough for their era, that a junior right to a large amount of water was better than a senior right to no canal at all. They bet that the river would remain generous enough that the subordination would never truly bite. For decades, that bet paid off, as the water flowed and the cities boomed. It is only now, with the river in its deepest decline in a century, that the true cost of that old concession has come due, landing on a generation of Arizonans who were not even born when the deal was signed. There is a hard lesson in that about how the choices made in one era of abundance can become the traps of a later era of scarcity. Nevada, the third lower basin state, also holds junior rights and faces early cuts, though its situation is different because its share is so tiny to begin with. Nevada was allotted the smallest portion of any state, and while it too is cut early as the river declines, the absolute amount is small, and Nevada has conserved so aggressively that it has softened the blow. But the principle is the same. Nevada, lacking California's deep seniority, is among those asked to give up water before the senior giant does. So the two smaller lower basin users, Arizona and Nevada, find themselves at the front of the line for cuts, while the largest user of all sits protected behind its century-old legal shield. Let's make the unequal math concrete, because it is genuinely striking. Under the framework now being put in place to manage the shrinking river, when the lower basin faces a shortage, the burden is divided in a way that reflects this hierarchy. In a representative shortage scenario, Arizona might be asked to give up something on the order of 760,000 acre-feet of water, while California, despite using far more water overall, gives up a substantially smaller amount, closer to 440,000. And crucially, on the very first slice of cuts, the initial reductions the lower basin must make, California often contributes nothing at all, with Arizona absorbing the overwhelming majority. The senior state is protected on the first and most painful cuts, and only begins to share the burden once the shortage grows deeper. This is the priority system translated into hard numbers, and it shows exactly what being last in line is worth. It is worth hundreds of thousands of acre-feet of protection, year after year. But here is where the story gets more subtle and more interesting, because California is not a single, unified water user. Within California, there is its own internal pecking order, its own hierarchy of seniority, and understanding it reveals something surprising about who really holds the most powerful water right on the entire river. Decades ago, California's various water users agreed among themselves to rank their priorities, to decide who within the state would be satisfied first. And at the very top of that internal hierarchy sit not the great coastal cities, but the agricultural districts of the desert, a cluster of farming regions, chief among them the Imperial Irrigation District in the southeastern corner of the state, hold the oldest and most senior rights of all. The Imperial Valley, a stretch of reclaimed desert near the Mexican border, possesses what may be the single largest and most senior water right on the entire Colorado River. This leads to a fact that genuinely surprises most people. The most legally protected water on the Colorado River does not belong to Los Angeles or San Diego or any of the great cities where millions of people live. It belongs to farmers. The Imperial Irrigation District alone, serving around 500,000 acres of farmland, holds a claim to more Colorado River water than entire states, and its rights are so senior that they sit near the front of the entire line. The sprawling urban water agency that supplies drinking water to some 19 million people across the Los Angeles and San Diego region actually holds rights that are junior, within California, to those desert farms. So in the strange logic of Western water law, the water that grows alfalfa and winter lettuce in the Imperial Valley has a stronger legal claim than the water that fills the taps of one of the largest urban populations in the country. The cities, for all their size and political power, sit lower in the hierarchy than the farms that got there first, and those farms are not growing trivial things. The desert valleys of Southern California, watered by these senior rights, produce an astonishing share of the nation's winter vegetables, the overwhelming majority of the leafy greens and salad crops that Americans eat during the cold months. When you eat a winter salad, the water in that lettuce very likely came from these most senior claims on the Colorado River. This is part of what makes the seniority so entrenched and so fiercely defended. It is not just abstract legal privilege. It underpins a multi-billion-dollar agricultural empire that feeds much of the country. To cut that water is to touch not just a legal right, but a pillar of the national food supply, which is exactly why those senior rights have proven so difficult to reduce. This creates a genuine dilemma that goes far beyond California's borders. Much of the water used by these senior farms goes to grow forage crops like alfalfa, which are low in value per drop compared to vegetables, and much of that hay feeds cattle or is shipped overseas. Critics argue that some of the most senior, most protected water on a river in crisis is being used to grow low-value crops, and that redirecting even a portion could ease the shortage. But the farmers respond that their rights are legally ironclad, that they have farmed this land for generations, and that they should not be forced to sacrifice their livelihoods to bail out cities that grew recklessly on junior water. It is genuinely wasteful to grow thirsty hay in a desert during a historic drought, and also unjust to strip established farmers of rights they built their lives around. This knot, senior farm water versus the thirsty growing cities, is one of the hardest to untangle on the river, because both the law and the moral arguments pull in opposite directions. Now, it would be dishonest to leave you with the impression that California escapes the crisis entirely, because the newest developments complicate the picture, and accuracy matters. As the river has continued to fall to historic lows, the pressure has grown so intense that even California, for all its seniority, is now being drawn into the cuts. Under the latest federal framework for managing the river, California is, for the first time in a serious way, being asked to give up a meaningful volume of water alongside Arizona and Nevada. Being last in line, it turns out, no longer means being untouched. It means being cut later, and less, and being protected on the first and deepest reductions, but it no longer means being spared altogether. The river has simply shrunk too far for anyone, even the most senior user, to remain completely insulated. So the accurate picture is not that California is immune, but that it remains the most shielded, giving up proportionally less, and only after its junior neighbors have absorbed the first blows. This unequal arrangement sits at the center of one of the most heated fairness debates on the entire river, and it deserves to be presented honestly, because there are serious arguments on both sides. Critics of California's protected position, including many voices in the states upstream, ask a pointed question. Is it truly fair that the single largest user of a shrinking river should be the most shielded from cutting back? California's enormous allocation is roughly equal to the entire combined consumption of the four states and the upper part of the basin. To these critics, the priority system locks in a century-old inequity, allowing the biggest user to hide behind old legal claims while smaller and newer users and the states upstream are told to shoulder the sacrifice. From their point of view, a genuine crisis demands that everyone give in proportion to what they use, and the state using the most should give the most, not the least. But the defenders of seniority have an equally serious argument, and it is not merely self-interest dressed up as principle. The entire structure of water law in the West, and indeed much of property law, rests on the reliability of prior appropriation. The whole point of a senior right is that it can be counted on, that the person or district that invested first built the canals, planted the fields, and developed the economy around a reliable water supply can trust that their right will hold. If seniority can be swept aside whenever a crisis makes it inconvenient, defenders argue, then no water right anywhere is secure, and the entire foundation of investment and planning in the West collapses. From this view, honoring California's seniority is not favoritism. It is upholding the rule of law that everyone, including the junior users, ultimately depends on for stability. Both arguments have real force, and the tension between them, between fairness in a crisis and the sanctity of established rights, is precisely why sharing the shrinking river is so agonizingly difficult. There is one more twist that shows that even California's protected position carries a hidden cost, a trap of its own. When the senior farming districts of the Imperial Valley conserve water, often by leaving fields temporarily unplanted, that saved water stays in the reservoirs and helps the whole system. But the runoff from those fields had been feeding a large inland lake. And as the farms send less water into it, that lake shrinks and its exposed bed turns to toxic dust that blows into surrounding communities, creating a genuine public health hazard. So even when California uses its senior rights to help by conserving, it triggers an environmental crisis that harms its own people. The protection that seniority provides does not free California from hard choices. It simply changes their shape. Every path on this river, even the most legally advantaged one, leads to difficult trade-offs. So what is the real lesson of California being last in line? It is that the pain on the Colorado River is not distributed by need, or by size, or by fairness, but by a rigid hierarchy of legal seniority written down long ago and defended fiercely ever since. That hierarchy explains why the biggest user is the most protected, why Arizona pays the steepest price for a canal it built 2 generations ago, and why the most senior water on the entire river belongs to desert farms rather than great cities. It is a system that brings a kind of order and predictability to the chaos of scarcity, but at the cost of an unequal distribution of suffering that many find hard to accept. And it is a system now being tested as never before, as the river falls so low that even the mightiest senior rights are finally being touched. In the end, being last in line is a powerful thing, but it is not the same as being safe. California's seniority has protected it for a century, has kept its cuts smaller and later than its neighbors, and has preserved an agricultural empire and a vast urban population against the worst of the shortage. But the river does not read legal documents, and it does not honor priority dates. It simply carries less water every year. The priority system can decide the order in which the states feel the pain, and it can decide who feels it first and who feels it last. What it cannot do is create water that is not there. As the Colorado continues its long decline, the line everyone is standing in only grows shorter, and even the state at the very back of it, the protected giant, the senior power on the river, is beginning to feel the scarcity reach out and touch it at last. Being last in line buys time, and it buys protection, but on a river that keeps on shrinking, it does not, in the end, buy escape. And perhaps that is the deepest truth hidden inside this whole strange hierarchy. The priority system is, at its core, a machine for deciding the order of loss, a century-old apparatus for answering who suffers first when there is not enough. It is very good at that job. It tells you, with legal precision, that Arizona goes before Nevada's deeper cuts, that both go before California, and that within California, the cities go before the oldest farms. What it cannot answer is the larger question the river is now forcing upon everyone: what happens when the shortage grows so vast that it chews through the entire line? junior and senior alike, a pecking order assumes that somewhere near the top there is still enough. The frightening possibility now facing the West is a future in which even the most senior rights cannot be fully honored because the water simply is not there. On that day, the priority system will have run out of people to cut, and the states will face the one task their century of legal maneuvering was designed to avoid, deciding together not who loses first, but how they will all live on far less than they were promised. California is last in line, but the line is getting shorter every year, and no one, not even the state at the very back, can be certain the water will still be there when the crisis finally reaches them.